Hey there, welcome to Paperclipping. I'm your host, Noelle Hyman. This is the second part of our two-part video series where we're taking on all those leftovers that we still have, especially leftovers from collections. We're gonna make our own homemade kits that we're really excited to do. And today I'm gonna share some tips, a whole bunch of tips actually, that will help you make your own homemade kits successfully so that you'll want to scrapbook with them right away. We're also going to tackle some of those papers and items that are kind of in between. We kind of like certain things about them, but then there's other things that we find difficult to use or don't really care for. Let's get started for today's episode of Paperclipping. I am almost done removing all the papers that I like from this Sundrifter collection of Studio Calico. There is still this one page that I kind of like. I don't like anything else that I've got in this pad with it though. None of these other papers inspire me. And this on its own doesn't really inspire me. I think it's kind of boring. The colors are kind of eh. But I know that I've liked these colors with other colors before. And this is a very basic design that's easy to work with. So I'm gonna pull this last paper out and I'll be passing the other papers along to somebody else. And I'm gonna look for other things that I can put with it. And I've decided to look at my Lucky Charm collection by Dear Lizzie because it's got a lot of pinks and it's got some red, and this has some red polka dots. So what I like to do is take my one piece of paper that I'm trying to work with and build a kit from and put it next to other papers and see what I like. And so far none of these are exciting me. That's getting a little better. And there's a little better, but that's not quite what I want either. I do like it with that. And I have already pulled these out. What I really liked, my favorite thing, was I put it next to some of these strips here. This was up here like this. And I absolutely love this. I love these colors together. And this is great when you get multiple colors in one sheet because then you can go off of those. So I've actually already gone through this paper pad and pulled out the colors that are in these strips. So let's take a look at what I've got for this new kit that I'm building from these. Here are the pieces of the kit that I've put together for this one piece of paper. And this is the biggest kit that I've put together so far between the last video, the part 1, and this video. And I want to share some tips for putting together kits to make it easier so you can know what matches well and get some ideas for how to make sure it looks good. So one thing that I think is really important is the fact that proportions matter. And hopefully we know that in design, that when you're mixing and matching colors or patterns, the proportions you use of each color or pattern really makes a big difference. You want to have a lot of one color, a medium amount of another color, and then small accents of one or two other colors or something like that. And when you're putting together a kit and trying to decide if things will look good together, it's still a visual exercise that you're doing, and those things really help. So I know that this looks great with this in small amounts. And so when I've picked out this other color, this kind of mint color, I'm keeping it more as an accent. That doesn't mean when I go to scrapbook with it that I'm gonna do it that way, but in terms of helping me decide whether these things look good, that's what I'm doing. Because sometimes if I put too much of two different things, two big blocks together, and they're two completely different colors, it looks overwhelming. But when I put it in small amounts, one of them in small amounts and the other in big amounts, that helps a lot. So I've got these laid out so that they look like accents instead of dominant colors. I've got this blue laid out as an accent. Same thing with this. When I had put these two side by side in the pad, I didn't really love them and I didn't think they would look good. But when I put it back here with these other dominant accents, it brings out these colors in a nice way without them being overwhelming with this. Same thing with this. I originally had chosen it last and had stuck it down here, and it didn't quite seem like it was matching until I brought it over here, and I kind of have these colors up here and these down here, and as sort of a medium amount, I think they look really great with this. So it's something to think about when you're playing with your papers and trying to decide, is change the amounts a little bit, make some peek out in small amounts and 1 or 2 show in large amounts so that you can decide, you get a better feel visually whether those look good together. And like I said, when it actually comes down to scrapbooking, you can change that up, change those proportions. I just want to show you that I've also got some vellum that I've added to this kit. I don't really completely love the way that it looks with all of these together, but I'm just keeping them off to the side or toward the back. So I know I have them to use because they do match, but as I'm choosing, this looks much better laid out this way. You can see I've also got some scraps and cut up pieces and embellishments. Another thing is to think about is what you put next to what matters too. So I might not like 2 of these papers together, but I do like them with something in between. Here's another one of my kits. And another tip that I have to share is to consider how you scrapbook. I happen to like a lot of lighter, airier pages a lot more often than heavier ones. And so I scrapbook with white cardstock quite a bit. So it makes sense for me to sometimes bring in some white cardstock. Now this is already a fresh light tone and I know I love it with the white. But sometimes if I'm working with papers that are dark and heavy, I feel like it's dark and heavy and I don't like it, and so that in that case it can help too to bring in some white to lighten it up. Now that's the case with me because that's how I scrap. You might do it differently. You might find that you use craft paper quite a lot as your background. Maybe that's the majority of the time you use craft, and so for you it might make sense to pull out some craft paper, or maybe it's something else. So whatever it is that you find yourself doing a lot, that you love a lot, bring that in as you start pulling together your kits. My 4th tip when putting together kits is to go with things that excite you. Go with pairs and matches and kits that excite you. Not just sticking with stuff that could work or it matches it well enough or it's supposed to work. Because the point of this is to get you motivated to use these products. So if they're not really exciting you, then you're not going to be any more motivated to use it. It's not going to make it easier for you to use it. But if you put it together and you go, oh my gosh, I love this, I want to scrapbook with that, then you know it's working for you. If you're not getting that feeling, set it aside. We'll try a few other things in a few minutes in this video, and ultimately you may end up getting rid of some of that stuff. Here's an example of paper that was not working for me before. This paper right here, it's a very cool toned blue, and set in this paper pad with papers like this, it's very cool, and for me, it feels really dreary. It's too much of a dreary downer kind of color for me for some reason, even though I really like the idea of this paper, especially in my darker scrap room where it looked a little bit darker. And I had a sweater for a number of years that I also didn't wear much because it was a color very similar to this until I started bringing in a few new mint colored tops that I had, and suddenly I saw this color with the mint and it kind of brightened it up for me, and now I love this color because I love it with this color right here. And so sometimes it's a matter of finding a bright, or not even necessarily bright, a color that you're loving or a color that's on trend that you can put with it to bring it up. I'm going to scrapbook a page now with these 2 pieces of paper, and this is a leftover scrap that I had, and I like to let my scraps help me determine my design. It's very simple and easy to scrapbook that way. It's like getting help from somebody else. So I'm just going to take it and bring it down a little bit like this and make it so I've got a whole segment to work with here. And I decided to do a page about my boys, including my husband, and how they love to be early. They get up earlier than they need. They like to get out of the house earlier than they need to get somewhere, and they like to arrive early. And they found one day when my oldest had to be at school for an earlier appointment, they were thrilled at that whole concept of going even earlier than they'd been going before. And so they made it a goal to start leaving at that earlier time. And so that's what this page is about. So I've pulled out a little bird die cut to go with the early bird theme and a little clock. And I took a scrap of paper that's just gray. It was like a gray doily. And I'm not a giant fan of gray. So I thought it would be a good way to use up that by covering up this die cut piece of grunge board with the paper and coloring it into this turquoise. So here are the 2 different parts of that. And then I'm going to use some string to hang my little clock as a beak. And then I've got these embellishments, again, embellishments that I just never got around to. I don't really scrapbook about school all that much. And here I've got good morning. So I thought I'd cluster these together. I'll just start laying them out. Let's go like this and cluster them into sort of a line here. Maybe if this is like this, sort of a line coming down this edge here of this paper. And maybe we'll put this one, because I don't want it to be one long line. I want it to be sort of a line, sort of a cluster. And we can do something like that. Maybe it'll come down here. Maybe it'll come like that. But as I start putting it together to help me make that final decision, once I tape my papers down and start getting them in place. So I'm going to go ahead and adhere what I know for sure, and then we'll fool around with the rest of it. Here's my little bird with its found clock hanging from a string from its beak. And the way that I did that is I took a little metal Tim Holtz clock and some embroidery thread, which I doubled up. So basically I folded it in half, brought the ends together. Then I'm going to take the two ends and put them through the clock like this and pull it through until you have a little loop on top. Put the string through the loop like that. And then figure out where your bird will be and where the little beak will be. And for me, it was probably right around here, so you tie a little knot there. Just like that. And that way then, this can hang from the little bird's beak. So what I did was I put the knot on top of the bird's beak, and then I've got one of the piece of strings on the outside of its beak, and the other is down on the back. So it's hanging from that knotted part of the bird. And so now I've got my string here, and I've got it all loopy, and I want it to stay loopy. So let's see what we can do to make it stay. To get my string to stay where I want it, I'm going to use golden matte medium. You don't need to use golden brand. Any kind of matte medium or matte gel medium will work. You definitely want to use matte though, if you can, because otherwise you might end up with some shine, and we don't want any shine. The matte will dry invisible. So I'm putting a little bit of, I kind of messed up my loop there. I'm putting a little bit of the matte medium where I want the loop to be, and then I'm going to press it down, and I'll put a little more on top of it like this. And you can put as much of this matte medium on as you want. You might want to put more around the thread if you feel like you need to secure it a little better than that. And I'm going to put more on the bottom of this part of the thread here so that this whole line will stay where I want it to, because I want it to kind of loop up around this way. So you just work with that a little bit. It's a great way to get something on your paper that you don't have a whole lot of surface for the glue. It does, now you see I've got a little bit on there, and when it dries it should get more invisible. It's not completely invisible, just beware of that. I can see that right now while it's wet, it pulls out some of the color on the paper, so the paper is slightly darker there. I think in my experience it should tone down there a bit, but I probably wouldn't recommend just getting it all over everywhere if you can avoid that. Here's my finished page. I added some white thickers with some glitter that would brighten it up, and I filled in this trapped white space here with a little bit of enamel dots, added a little more playfulness, and filled out the space a bit with the other enamel dots over here. I'm going to put my journaling here, and if I need to, I'll add a little bit more down at the bottom. Just a few last tips on putting together your own kits. I've got a couple mini kits here, and they are a combination of brand new products and older products. And sometimes when you take something new and combine it with something old, you can do some awesome things. So I had these papers left over that I still absolutely love, but I didn't find anything else to pair them with. But my order of new stuff just barely came in just as I'm finishing up my new kits, and it was the perfect combination for these. And this went with those flowers that we had worked with in the last video, and this cutout paper and this piece of scrap here. And then here's another one very similar here. Let's move this over. I had all these wonderful cutout pieces but nothing that was really working for me to put them with, and they look so fresh and new with these two new pieces, and I'm more excited about them now than I've ever been before. Also, sometimes you end up with some pieces that you really like a lot, but you're not inspired to put them with anything. In that case, you can just take those and organize them in more traditional ways, like organizing them by color, or you can organize, here's another set by color, or you can organize them by the mood or the tone they give. I do that a lot. Or you can organize them by background, so this would make good background paper. And so with this, you can do all those things. And I actually like to do them all because I think it's a really great way to see your product in different ways and inspire new ways of using them. And also, sometimes we're looking for product for different reasons. Sometimes I'm looking for green, but not very often. Not very often am I looking for a specific color, but sometimes I am. So it's nice to have your product organized in multiple ways so that whichever way it is that you're looking for something, you've got something there. The last thing is to cut some of them up into scraps. And sometimes I think some of my product looks even better when I cut them down because full size, they can be overwhelming, some of those products. And then when you crop them into something small like this is much more usable in many cases than a whole entire orange piece. But that's even more so sometimes with big bright flowers. Now that you've matched up probably most of your papers, you probably still have some that have certain qualities you like and certain qualities you don't. I've got these paper flowers that I do not like in terms of the pattern. I really don't like this mix of pattern, even though I've liked all the other flowers. And so instead of throwing these away or trying to use them, I've used a color medium on them. I'm using embossing powder for these ones. I've got purple and I've got white, and I like that they make these more of a substantial embellishment because they become a little bit thicker with that embossing powder, especially if you do 2 or 3 layers with it. And if you have patterned paper that's just too vibrant, you can use an opaque white spray mist. This Mr. Huey's is good for when you want some opacity like that so that you can tone down the brightness of the color of your paper. One last thing that we can try before we throw away or get rid of some of our last remaining papers is to do a bit of cutting. And I like to take some papers that I know I'm not going to be able to use and then just cut up some pieces that I would use and get rid of the rest. And this is a good example of that because it's got high contrast with a white background and all these different colors. And I find busy papers like this really difficult to use. And so instead of using them as is, I prefer to do a bit of fussy cutting and cut up myself a few bits of images and icons that I can layer on my papers. And I might take maybe 5 or 6 of these, maybe less. It just depends on what I think I want. But I wouldn't ever cut every single one and keep them because that's a lot of work and a lot of items that I probably would never be able to use. Here's another one where instead of cutting them out, which you could also do, I punched them out. And so I could mix them up and there's less white and less contrast if I kept them all together, or I could isolate them by color and use them with other kits that I've put together or other papers. And then finally something like this where I really like the idea of the buildings down here, but I find the overall paper kind of dreary. So I might cut away just this building cluster here and get rid of most of the gray. And I might go all the way around, come down here around the arrows, and maybe even keep a little more of that white. I could do enamel dots or something that lead the eye even further, or just leave it white. And then I might also take, in fact, what I will do is take just this corner here, this little square, and cut that and use it for the cute little sun and cloud. But I probably wouldn't keep the rest just because it's kind of a brown gray that I have a hard time enjoying so much. So here's my little square. And now I've got something that I could layer up and use with other things. I now have a whole bunch of kits that are calling my name, and I'm super excited to go scrapbook with them. I hope these videos gave you some ideas for how you can pull together your leftover products so that you can make your own homemade kits and have what feels like brand new supplies to work with. Thank you for joining me today. Until next time, have fun paper clipping.